Hello and welcome everybody, my name is Glitch and this is episode 3 of the What is StarCraft series. Episode 3, I am going to be talking a little bit about the Protoss race and give you just a bit of a quick overview as to the kinds of buildings and the kinds of units that the Protoss army have. The first building I'm going to talk about is the Nexus. Much like the command center for the Terran, the Nexus is where you build your workers. Not only that, the Nexus also has an ability called Chrono Boost. This is an ability that increases the operation speed of any building by 50% for about 20 seconds. So as you can see, if I make a probe here and I Chrono Boost it, you can see that it starts to make that probe much faster. The probe is the workhorse of the Protoss army. This small unit allows us to gather resources as well as build buildings. One of the most basic buildings of the Protoss is this one that I'm circling around right now. This is called a pylon. This allows us to do a couple of things. Much like the supply depot for the Terran, a pylon increases the maximum supply count of your army. Also, if you notice, there's this large blue circle around the pylon. That is a radius in which we must build our buildings. All our buildings must be powered by a pylon at all times. As you can see, my probe is going to start building a building. And as long as it is within the radius of this pylon, that building will operate. Notice also that my probe is not actually building the building. That is because the Protoss warp in their buildings. Once they start to place it, they can move away and the building will finish building on its own. Much like the Terran, the Protoss have three basic structures from which they produce army units. The first is the gateway. This is where the Protoss create their basic ground army type units, which I will cover in a little bit. Second is the robotics facility, where the Protoss produces both ground and air mechanical type units. Finally, there's the Stargate. This is where the Protoss air army comes from. Now you may have noticed that I have two gateways here in place, and there is a reason for that. Later on in the game, you can upgrade your gateways. As you can see here, I have this ability called Transform to Warp Gate. If I just click on my gateway and I click on that Transform to Warp Gate button, my gateway will start to open like this, and whereas before, just like a Terran structure, I could click on a unit and it will start to build, and when it is done, it will come out. With Warp Gates, I can click on a unit and I can place this unit anywhere I have a pylon, and it will just begin to warp that unit in there much faster than a gateway actually builds a unit.
Command me.
I would really like to stress that when I say I can warp in units anywhere, I really do mean anywhere that I have a pylon. You can see that I've placed this pylon here on the map far away from where my warp gate is. My warp gate is up here. This pylon is all the way down here, and even though it's all the way across the map, I can still select a zealot and warp it in. This allows me to have enormous map control, as I can just place pylons anywhere on the map and instantly warp in army units there to that location. Again, much like the Terran, I have two main structures that I use to upgrade my army units. The first is the Forge. The Forge is where I can upgrade the attack damage and the armor of all my ground units. The Cybernetics Core is where I can upgrade the attack damage and the armor of my air units. Now there's one other thing I need to note about the Forge. The Forge allows me to place the only defensive structure that I have as a Protoss player, and that is the Photon Cannon. You can see I have now placed 3 photon cannons. These are the only defensive structures available to the Protoss. They do have the ability to attack both ground and air units, however. I'm now going to spend just a moment talking about some of the tech structures that Protoss have. From a gateway, on its own, all the gateway can produce is zealots. Once you add on a cybernetics core, and you have a cybernetics core somewhere in your base, it allows you to build sentries and stalkers. Once you have a Twilight Council, this allows you to upgrade your zealots and your stalkers. A Templar Archives allow you to create High Templar, and a Dark Shrine allows you to create Dark Templar. All these units are units that come from a gateway, but you need these extra tech structures to be able to build some of these units. It's a similar story for the robotics facility. From the robotics facility, on its own, it can produce an observer, a warp prism, and an immortal. But when you add on a robotics bay, you can also produce Colossus from the robotics facility. Finally, you have the Stargate, which can produce Phoenixes and Void Rays on its own, but when you add a fleet beacon to the mix, you can produce carriers. I'm now going to talk briefly about the units of the Protoss army. The first unit we have is the Zealot. The Zealot is a basic attack melee armored unit that does a pretty good amount of damage and has a good amount of armor. Next is the Sentry. The Sentry is a spellcaster unit which can apply force fields which make impassable terrain for units. They have a Guardian Shield which protects all units under the shield, and they have the ability to create hallucinations of units to fool your opponent into thinking you have more units than you actually have. The Stalker is a ranged attack unit that deals a lot of damage and also has the ability to blink. This allows them to get up and down ledges very easily. Next is the High Templar. The High Templar is another spellcast unit that has very low hit points, but has the ability to cast Psionic Storm, which is a very powerful ability that can deal a lot of damage to many units within a small area. Finally, there's the Dark Templar. The Dark Templar is a permanently cloaked unit that does massive amounts of damage, even though it doesn't have much health or armor. This means that it is very, very good for doing stealth missions and sneaking into the back of mineral lines to get a lot of worker kills before an opponent can get up detection. Next, I'm going to talk about the units that come from a robotics facility. The first is an Observer, a flying, permanently cloaked scout unit. The next is the Warp Prism. The Warp Prism is a dropship. Not only is it a dropship, but it also has this ability called Phasing Mode. This is where it creates a warp field similar to the one created by a pylon. This means that I can move somewhere, create this field, and then use one of my warp gates to warp units into those locations. Next is the Immortal. The Immortal is a very, very tanky, damage-dealing unit that can just take a huge beating from enemy units. Finally is the Colossus. The Colossus is an area of effect attack unit that is very, very expensive, but it deals a lot of damage to many units in a line. Finally, we have the Stargate units, the first of which is the Phoenix, a very, 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 very fast anti-air attack unit. It also has the ability called Graviton Beam. This allows me to take ground units and lift them into the air, temporarily disabling them. Next, there's the Void Ray. The Void Ray is an attack unit that does damage through this beam, which charges up over time and slowly deals more and more damage. Finally, there's the Carrier. Much like the battlecruiser of the Terran army, the Carrier is the heavy damage dealer and heavy damage taker for the Protoss army. It has many, many small little ships that come out to attack its opponent. Now there's one unit I have not yet mentioned, and that is because it is another unit that comes from the Nexus. Now, you can only have one on the field, and it's a very special unit. It is called the Mothership.
Reinforcing Psyweb.
The Mothership is a very, very slow-moving air unit, which has the ability to cloak any and all units, as well as buildings that are around it within a small radius. It also has a couple of different spells, the first of which is Mass Recall. This allows a Mothership to warp units to it no matter where they are. And just like that, the units come to the Mothership. The other is the Vortex. The Vortex is an ability that you typically use on enemy armies, which allows you to get some control or reduce the size of your army temporarily. If I place a Vortex here, you can see all the units there get sucked into that Vortex, cutting that army in half. The Mothership is definitely a very powerful unit. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You have now learned the basics of the Protoss race. You've now learned a little bit about the buildings and a little bit about the army units that the Protoss units have at their disposal. Now, much like the Terran episode, I'm hoping that this episode of What is StarCraft has encouraged you to go out and try a little bit of Protoss. Protoss is an extremely fun race to play. They're a race of very, very powerful, very strong psionic units that just deal massive amounts of damage and can take quite a beating. And I mean, come on, admit it, they're so pretty. Look at them. They're so shiny and pretty. Aww. So yeah, if you guys liked what you saw today, please comment, please subscribe down below, and please share with your friends. If you guys have other people that have never seen a game of StarCraft before, then point them in this series direction. I'm hoping that with this series I'll be able to introduce more people to the world of StarCraft and show that it's really, really not as complicated of a game as people give it credit for. Now just watch as Protoss just freaking wrecks this army, because, I mean, come on, they're just so good. They're so good. Look at them go. Look at them do their thing. They're so good. Thanks for watching, guys. GG. Glitch out.